Hello class, let's go over this assignment of colorizing a black and white photo or a drawing. So here I have my scanner. The scanner at school might look a little bit different, but I just want to go over the basics that I'm going to demo in person on Wednesday. You come in and you press the preview button and your preview scan should appear. We'll give that just a second to appear. And here we go. Now what you typically do first is you're going to draw a square around the item that you need. If there's already a square here and it's like a weird size because of someone who worked before you did that, you can adjust it this way, and you can also just erase it by hitting this eraser button over here. The next thing you want to do is come over here and you'll notice at the bottom here we have some options about image type and resolution. Now, if you have a grayscale image, you might not need to scan in color. You can. I typically do just because then I don't have to make a change later on when I add color. But maybe I'll take you through the process with grayscale. Resolution here you'll see it's set to 300 dpi. Remember this always. If you scan in your drawing at 300 dpi, that means you could essentially print off the drawing at the size that you scanned it in at. So whatever the size the drawing is, if you scan it at 300, that's going to be the largest it can go for further digital reproduction. So of course, if you want to make it larger, like your drawing's small or it's the size of a letter, and you want to make it larger for whatever reason, either for screen printing, for digital printing, t-shirt design, whatever, you would scan at a higher resolution. And these things essentially double in resolution, mean that you can double them in size later on in Photoshop. So I generally, if I'm not even sure what I'm going to use a drawing for, I scan it in at a high resolution, 1200, and then I'm good. We're going to hit the scan button. This dialog box should appear, and where it's going to go, what you're going to call it. So right here is where you can name it, and usually right here is where the location is where it's going to go. I almost always have these set to be JPEGs and just make sure that they're at a very high quality. Some people love to use TIFFs. I don't. JPEGs are great for me. They do everything I want. We're going to hit OK. And then the scanning should happen, right? So while that's waiting, I'm going to go over to Photoshop, and I have one over here. So let's first go up to image size. So I'm going to go up to image, because I'm talking about the image size, and then down to image size. And this is where this resolution is, right? Now this one I scanned in earlier, so it's at 300 pixels per inch. If this was at higher and I turn off resample image, you'll notice that if I change this, these numbers actually change, right? So let's actually open up the one we just scanned, since that's done. And here we are. So this one was scanned at a higher resolution. And so if I have resample image selected off, right, so that if all I'm doing is changing the resolution, I drop this down to 300, you can see that I can now, my image, if I were to reprint it, if I were going to print it digitally, reproduce it, I could go up to 22 by 30. So it's great. My small drawing can now be essentially printed out at a large size. And that goes for anything you scan, drawings, photos, etc. Photos and some other printed materials, you'll have an issue where the actual dots might show up, so it won't get as detailed as a drawing. All right, so here's my drawing, right? You'll notice, I'll zoom in, that I still have some tone of the paper, right? And that my blacks are not as black as they could be. And that's going to happen for any drawing you have. You might have eraser marks, you might have pencil lines, whatever. And so I'm going to show you now how to change that. So the first step in this process, the second step after you scan your image is to adjust under image the levels. So I don't know if you're familiar with Photoshop, you can either use levels or curves, it does not matter. I use levels because I'm just used to levels. So the levels shows up like this. This is a histogram, and this is a graph that details how much black is in the image and how much white is in the image. You'll see by this graph there's a bump here, which means there is a lot of tones in between black and gray, and that there's actually a lot of white. There is no black. And that's shown because it's kind of washed out here. So to change that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this little black pyramid and pull to the right, and you'll notice, I have it set to preview here, that my black ink lines get darker. and that's because I'm crushing this histogram to make these things that were originally black-gray into being pure black. Conversely, if I want to get rid of some of this paper tone, you don't have to. If you like paper tone in your in this project, keep it. But if you want to get rid of this, or you have eraser marks you want to get rid of, you could pull the white pyramid in, and you'll notice that that then drops out. Let me zoom out here so you can kind of see. Once you're happy with your level change, you hit OK, and that's been adjusted. To get rid of these things, you can use things like the clone stamp tool, the healing brush tool, whatever your preference is. So I'm not going to go do all of them, but you can see what happens there. All right, and then I also have I downloaded a photo of Abraham Lincoln, and so we'll go over both photo and drawing. But we'll stick with the drawing since we started here. So I'm going to unlock the background layer so that I can actually work with it, and we're going to go over how to color the line work. So first, if you want to color the line work of a drawing or a photo, you're going to make a brand new layer that's empty, and you're going to change that layer. Instead of being a normal style, you're going to change that to be what's called overlay, and you'll see what overlay does in a second. So I'm going to grab a color. This gold is fine, and I have a brush right here. Now I'm going to use the mouse for starters, but then I'll move over to a tablet to show you how much nicer that is. And so with this set to overlay, when you paint, it's going to change. Let me pick a different color. And so you can see how this sort of lightly changes the tone of this. The blacks still remain a little bit. Let me zoom out to show you. And then you can fill with the paint bucket just with this purple. I changed to purple to make it more obvious. Now it looks kind of purple, right? It still retains a lot of the black there. Now this works really well in photos, right? So I've set this layer to be on top. I grab my brush. Maybe I'll grab more of a skin tone effect, right? And then I can make my brush bigger or smaller, and I can paint. You'll notice really light lights don't actually work, so I'm sorry. Let me try a darker, lighter tone. And you can see that this works really well on photographs, right? Using the overlay, it maintains some of the black of the image, of the darkness of the image, but then just changes the tone of the skin or whatever you want to draw, right? And so that is set to overlay. So if that works for changing the tone that is already there, whether it be the ink drawing, right, or the tone of the photo. A new layer on top set to overlay works like that. Let me show you next how to fill in the areas. So let's say you want to fill in this area of the eyeball. You don't want to draw on this layer here because this has the drawing on it. So the way we do this is we make a brand new layer. We actually pull this brand new layer underneath the drawing. If it won't let you do this, you have to unlock your layer. So like if it has this lock here, unlock it, and then you can grab and drag layers underneath that. With this layer underneath it, I'm going to, let's just change this to a blue, draw underneath the eyeballs. Now you'll notice right away I can't see what's going on. I'm painting, but you're not seeing it, and that's because this image has both black and white on it. And so if we go to the drawing layer, if we change this to be what's called multiply, that'll change the way that this layer interacts with the layers underneath. With multiply on, this layer is telling, we're telling Photoshop, if it's white, let's let whatever's behind pass through, and if it's black, don't do that. So with this set to multiply, I can come back down to my layer underneath, and you can fill in these areas, right? And likewise, you can do that with photos, same way. So if you want to, let's see here, we'll color in his shirt a little bit, set this to multiply, and paint. Just make sure because sometimes if you're painting and it's wrong, you're on the wrong layer. Control Z, Control Alt Z, Command Z, Command Alt Z, and then you can paint in, make his shirt blue, right? Now you might not do this so much with photos because the tone isn't there. So obviously this is not a blue shirt that he was wearing. It was a white shirt. So if you want to maintain accuracy, you probably would never do multiply in photos. But of course, this is your art. You can do whatever you want with it. So the problem with using this technique, it's fast, it works well, is that they don't work well together. So that you'll notice that if I want to use overlay at the same time I want to use multiply, my blue is gone. And that's because all this purple is taking over. And so I can erase some of that, but it's just problematic. It's not a great way to work, especially for drawings. And so this other method I'm going to show you just opens up a lot of possibilities for coloring. So I'm going to turn off those layers I just made in drawing, and I'm going to show you how to essentially remove the white of this drawing completely. Again, we've changed the level so we're happy with how it looks, but here's how you do this. You're going to go to Channels. You should see next to Layers over here, you should see Layers and then Channels. Click on your Channels tab, and then you have, should it look like this RGB channel. If you don't, come up to Image and Mode and make sure that you're in RGB color. We're going to hover over the RGB thumbnail, so the actual image of the RGB channel, and we're going to hold down Control, and you'll notice our cursor changes to a selection. You just click that once, and what you've told Photoshop is you want to grab all the white of this image. I'm going to go back to Layers, and so here's how I do it. I'm going to turn this layer off so you can see what's going to happen. I'm going to make a brand new layer. I'm going to go up to Select and select Inverse because I don't want the white, I actually want all the non-white, the black, the tone. And I'm going to select Inverse. And so now I have all that tone. Then I'm going to go to Edit and Fill, and I'm going to, in this case, just fill with black, and we can always change that later. So I filled it with black, and I deselect Control D. And so now I have my image that's been pulled off of the white. What I typically do next is I make a new layer, and then I fill that with a background color. So I can just go back to grab white and just fill that underneath, and you'll notice it looks exactly like my drawing. Only now it's been removed, and so I have a lot of options. For starters, if you want to paint underneath, now all you need to do is make a new layer and paint the areas you want to paint. Let's see here, where did my... That's on white. There we go. Right? So you can easily paint underneath, right? Without having to set this layer to multiply. What you can also do is you can also now change the color of the line work, right? Let's change it. Grab another horrible color, this green. And so now you can come in here. You don't want to paint directly on this layer because it'll just override what's there. Instead, you want to do what's called a transparency lock. And the transparency lock button is right here. So I have my layer 3 drawing layer selected. And if I click on this, what you've told Photoshop to do is to lock the transparencies. So you can't add to the alpha channel. You can only change what's already there. And so with that selected, then you can come over here with the brush and the green, and you can come in here and just paint, right? And you can make this, all the line work green. And so this way is working is great because now they work in conjunction. They don't battle each other, the overlay and that. So I could come in here and you know, paint individually till I get it all. If I want it all green, I can also just come up to Edit and Fill and choose the foreground color that I have, which is green. Hit OK, and then I have that. What's also great about this process is you can also make a gradient. So I can go to the gradient tool, and let's grab an obvious rainbow color. And in this, I can just pull and drag a gradient on this, and it'll work like it'll look at the transparency. So maybe that's not a great option here. We'll go with these colors here. Yeah, so you can do like kind of a fun gradient. And so that's how you could do a drawing. Let's go back to the photo, and likewise you can do the same thing with the photo. You can come to Channels, Control click on that layer. You have all the on the thumbnail. You have all the white. Come back to Layers, make a new layer. I turn this one off so you can see what's going on. Select the inverse because you don't want the white, you want the actual tone, and then go to Edit and Fill. And likewise, you can be foreground color, you can do black, whatever, and here we go. Control D to deselect, make a new layer, and then fill that with white so it looks like the old photo. You can of course make it a little bit of an off-white if you want to make it look like an older photo. Let's try that. So now it has some sort of tone. And then likewise, just like the drawing, you can do a transparency lock, and then you can do things with this. You can, just like we did before, you can do a gradient, right? You could just fill it with whatever color you want. We can go back to black, and I'll change it to whatever, blue. Right? And then you can come in here and individually paint. So you can paint on underneath to actually have a fill. Actually, let me turn this back to black. And so we can paint underneath, right? And then we can also, of course, change the actual tone like we did with the overlay option to be there. And you'll see it's a little bit different in the photo. It doesn't retain that black. It jumps directly to red. So again, depending on what you're doing, if you're just colorizing photos, I think the overlay function works best. If you're, kind of doing an art project, playing around, this way works really well. And so let me show you a few more things. I'm going to turn this multiply off to back to normal, and I'm going to turn, this one is on overlay, I believe. So this one's great. So let's talk about using, kind of changing the tone of the color, because so far I've just been painting with like these solid colors. So if I turn this off, you can see these are just solid colors. And of course in Photoshop you can adjust those, right? So this blue maybe doesn't look realistic or nice because it's just one shade of blue. And so to change, to add highlights, to add shadow, what I would recommend doing is using what's called the burn and dodge tool. And that's over here, right here. Mine is currently set to burn. The burn will add shadows, and maybe the dodge tool is more obvious. The dodge tool will add highlights, and so you'll see more as I kind of turn this off. You can see what it's doing, right? It is now just not a solid blue. It's got these highlights and these shadows that you can get, almost like an oil painting. You can really get into. And that shows up very subtly here. But that's how you get, a more painterly-like approach in Photoshop. And of course, you can do that for the drawing also. So let's do a few more things. I'm going to change this back to black. And I'm going to save this as a Photoshop file. Great. So yeah, that's... let me talk about a few more things. It's probably a nice idea, if you're making this, as you're making this, if you're not sure, like, let's say you're not sure what kind of color you want his suit to be. If you kept that on a separate layer, separate from his skin tone, what's nice is then you can easily adjust that later on. What I mean by that is, let's say, pretend this is, his whole suit is a color, but then it turns out, no, we don't want it to be blue, we want it to be another color. And so what's great, if it's on its own layer, you can just come up to Layer and, Image and Adjustments, and we're going to use Hue Saturation, which you should have known before in a previous assignment. And you can just change the hue here. So if you're not sure, then you can change it later. You'll notice, in this case, the skin tone changes, and that's because it's all on the same layer. So keeping things on separate layer will make your workflow faster. Of course, you could just, let's say you made a mistake and they're all on the same layer, you could just grab a selection of the blue and then come up here to Image Adjustments and do Hue Saturation, and then it'll only happen inside this selection. So that, not all is lost if you don't do it this way. But as you work with this, if you work with this, keep that in mind. It'll make your workflow a lot faster. All right, great. So I've saved this as, and I want to show you another program that we have on the other side of the lab, which is where all the tablets are, and that's Clip Studio. It's this logo that you'll see on the Macs and the PCs. And this program is a great painting and drawing program. And what you can do is you can open up your Photoshop files in here. Let's see, where did I put it? The desktop? Yeah. and they all come around along for the ride. And I'm showing this one. I'm going to switch to a tablet now just so you can see what's going on. Let's get that over here. Let me make a new layer here. It's very similar to Photoshop. If you're, I can give you a demo if you're not entirely sure how to work it. But I want to show you. Let's turn off. Let's turn off the background so you can kind of see what's going to happen. All right. I'm going to come over here and grab the paintbrush tool. So if you like a painterly look, this program is fantastic. I'm going to show you what it does. So we'll use an oil paint because, oil paints, if you've taken a class, they mix very nicely. So this is hard to do in Photoshop, but this is so easy to do in Clip Studio to get this effect. So I have some yellow. I'll throw in the opposite color here. And you'll notice that it doesn't turn this bright, bright blue all of a sudden when it's over the yellow. And that's because it's mixing these two colors digitally. And so you can get a really nice sort of like effect, and you're using the tablet, so it's nice because if you press lightly, you get a lighter mark. If you press hard, you get a harder mark, or you just get more paint on there. And you can easily come in here and start to blend things in a fun way. Now you can really take your time and get it well. I'm not going to do that. But yeah, it's a great program for that. If you want to then also blend more, there's a blend tool that you can then come in here and blend even more. So again, you can do this in Photoshop. A lot of digital drawing artists, use Photoshop. But I just think in terms of how easy it is to use, Clip Studio is a better program. It's also extremely inexpensive. So if you decide to get a tablet, this is like $30, I think, to have for yourself. What's also great about this program is I really like this pen, the G Pen. And the G Pen is great with a tablet because you can get these sawtooth lines. So how these go from like sharp to fat. This is also something that's not easily done in Photoshop. Photoshop's just not made to be a drawing program in this regard yet, whereas this program is. So, and all these tools are great. So if you like the marker effect, it's great. Any number of things, highly recommended. And so you can bring in, I show this because you can bring in your digital drawing, your photograph from Photoshop, and then use the kind of effects that this has. So you can have a more oil painterly sort of effect underneath, right? Or on top, if you want. Right, so you can get some really modulated effects there. And that should cover it. Thank you.